Our lesson for today will be about plant hormones and responses. In this lesson, we are going to talk about the different plant hormones available. We are going to discuss how are these hormones transported in a plant and how could a plant respond to specific hormones available in it. At the end of the session, we are going to discuss what is the relation between hormones and the response that could it make according to a specific stimulus available in the environment. First of all, as you all know, plants, like all different organisms, it is a kind of collection of cells available. Plants can grow in response to different factors such as light, temperature, and gravity, for example. But actually, how do plants know how to grow down, or how do roots know how to grow down? How do stems know how to grow up? The answer of all of these questions is hormones. Hormone, as we all know, it is a kind of protein or chemical signal which is produced by a type of a plant which is called the hormone producing plant, and it is transported through the different, for example, here in this image we can see the hormone producing plant. This example is for a flower that is blooming. So the hormone produced here by the flower that is blooming, it is a hormone that could inhibit the blooming process of another flower. Whenever it is produced by the hormone producing cells, the hormone will travel or will be transported through the whole stem in order to reach the destination, which is called the target cell, and then it will have a function on this target cell. But there is another condition for hormones to function, which is the availability of the receptors on the cell membrane. If we look at this image available here, we can identify the cell membrane. This is the cell membrane of a plant cell. It may be a parenchyma cell, for example. On the cell membrane, we can identify specific receptors for specific hormones available with a binding site which has to be specific for each receptor. Whenever a hormone, for example, let's take the example of the hormone of triangular shape here. Whenever it binds to the specific binding site of the receptor, it will have a function and it will show this function. Hormones in plants actually have two main functions. Either hormones will make a growth promotion or they will make a growth inhibition according to the place where we can find this hormone, and according to the kind of this hormone we may have different functions. The growth promoter hormones available in a plant are the auxin, the cytokinins, and the gibberellins, and the growth inhibitor hormones are the ethylene, which is the only gas hormone available in plants, and we have the abscisic acid. In this lesson, we are going to talk in details about these hormones. So in each hormone, we are going to discuss where is it produced. We are going to talk about the way by which it is transported throughout the whole plant and the function of this hormone. Starting by the first hormone, which is the auxin. So the first hormone that we are going to talk about is auxins. Auxins, actually in a plant we can find different kinds of auxin, but we are going to be more specific in only one type, which is widely available and widely studied, which is the indoleacetic acid, or it is known by IAA. So whenever you see the word IAA, that means this is a type of an auxin. Auxin, it is a protein, a hormone that is produced by the upper part of the plant, which is the apical meristem. The auxin is produced here. We can see this is the apical meristems. The apical meristem cells produce auxin. And we have another place where we can find auxins, which is the lateral buds on each branch. For example, we can identify here at each branch in this cell, we have the availability of auxin. Auxin actually can be transported by two different ways. Either it is transported through the parenchyma cells. It can pass by diffusion from a cell to another. It passes between the parenchyma cells, or it can be transported also by the phloem of the vascular system. How does the auxin work in a cell? Auxin has two main functions. The first function of auxin, it is the cell elongation but not cell division. So it is not a process that could increase the size of a plant by mitotic division. Only it uses the cell elongation, which means the increase in the size of a plant. You can see here, increase in the size of the cell. You can see here how do cells, parenchyma cells in a tree can increase or can elongate in order to increase the size of the plant. We have to take care of something in auxin, which is a high amount of auxin means an inhibition of growth, while a low amount of auxin means a promotion of a growth. So whenever we find high amount of auxin, which is available mostly at the apical meristem or the upper part of a plant, this is the place where we have production of auxin. That means we have an inhibition of growth, and in the place where we can find a low amount of auxin, we have a promotion of growth. How does this process occur? Let's talk first about the first function of auxin, which is the cell elongation. Cell elongation, whenever auxin enters to the cell. Suppose now that this is the cytoplasm of the cell in this image. This is the cytoplasm of the cell. This is the cell membrane, and we can see here that on the cell membrane we have availability of this purple protein. It is called the hydrogen pump that has one function, which is whenever it is stimulated or activated by ATP molecules, it allows the movement of hydrogen ions from the cytoplasm to outside of the plant, passing through the cell wall available here. All of this layer that you can see here in this image is the cell wall of the parenchyma cell. This cell wall, as you all know, it is comprised of cellulose molecules. What happens when auxin is available inside the cytoplasm? Whenever auxin enters in low amount inside the cytoplasm of the cell, and make sure, pay attention that it has to be a low amount, as we have said before, in order to make the cell elongation, in order to make the promotion of growth. Auxin available inside will allow ATP molecules to activate the pump H+. When pump H+ or hydrogen pump opens, hydrogen ions will start flowing from the internal part of the cell, from the cytoplasm to outside. While it is moving outside, hydrogen ions will start weakening the cellulose, the bonds between cellulose, and this will transform the stiff cell wall into a flexible cell wall. Now, whenever hydrogen ions are moving whenever hydrogen ions move away from the cytoplasm or outside the cell, there is a decrease in the acidity of the cytoplasm, and this will allow water to enter to the internal part of the cell, and this will make the cell elongation process. This is concerning the first function of auxin. So the first function of auxin, as we have said, it is the cell elongation by allowing water molecules to enter to the cytoplasm of the cell, and by the weakening process of the cell wall. So as we have said, the second function of the auxin hormone or the IAA hormone is the apical dominance, which is the inhibition of the lateral growth of branches. What does happen? How could the auxin affect the growth of lateral branches? As we have said before, suppose now that we have, this is a plant, we have a plant available here, we have the roots and we have the stem available here. At the top of the stem we can find the apical meristem, and as we have said, the apical meristem, this is the place of production of the auxin hormone. The auxin hormone will start moving by parenchyma cells and the phloem until it reaches the lower part of the plant. So according to this image, we can identify that the auxin hormone is available in high amount here at the top of the stem. Here we have a high amount of auxin And we have, while moving downward, the amount of auxin will start decreasing. So here we can identify a low concentration or low amount of auxin. How could this concentration, this specific concentration of auxin hormone, affect the growth of lateral branches? Look what does happen. As you all know, if we look at it at any tree available in the street, we can identify the availability of short branches on the top of the stem. And while moving downward, we can identify that the branches will start increasing in length. We can obtain larger or taller branches. This is all related to the auxin hormone. So whenever we can identify high amount of auxin or IAA, indolacetic acid, there is a inhibition of growth of lateral branches and whenever we identify a low amount of auxin, there is a promotion of growth of branches. And now guess what will happen? Promotion of growth of branches. Imagine what could happen whenever we cut the apical meristem. Imagine we have cut the apical meristem and it is not available anymore. What could happen? If we cut the apical meristem, will it be any auxin production? For sure not. We will not have. So the amount of auxin will be low in the whole plant, and then branches will start growing up by the same length at the same rate until we have formation of another apical meristem. In this image, for example, if we look back at this image, we can identify here in this image we have the availability of the apical meristem. It is available here. This is the apical meristem available here, and we can see how do branches increase in size and in length while moving downward. But here, if we cut the apical meristem, we can see how branches almost they have the same size. This process, which is done by the availability of auxin, is called the apical dominance. And there is another function of auxin, which is at the end of each season, fruits drop because of the low amount of auxins available. So the second hormone that we are going to discuss today is the gibberellins hormone. Gibberellin actually, the opposite or in contrast to auxin, it is produced by the roots of a plant, not by the apical meristem. So mostly auxin, it is produced by the shoot system, and gibberellin is produced by the root system. The gibberellins stimulate the cell division and they affect the seed growth. The seed, whenever it has to form a new plant, it has to germinate. It germinates by the existence of gibberellin available in it. The difference between auxin and gibberellin actually, either the first difference is by the place of production of each hormone, and the second difference is by the way of transport of these hormones. The gibberellins actually are transported by the vascular tissues, either xylem or phloem. Now, gibberellins, as we have said, they are essential for the cell division of plants. So actually, as we have discussed before, they can promote the growth of the plant type. What could happen if either gibberellins are not available or the receptors of these hormones are not available on the cell membrane of target cells? If a cell contains the receptors of gibberellin hormones, but it lacks the gene of production of this hormone, so for sure we obtain dwarf plants like what is shown here in this image. So we have two reasons of obtaining dwarf plants, either by the lack of receptors available on the cell membrane of target cells, or by the lack of gene that could express the formation of gibberellin hormone. We have also, imagine that we have a plant here. We are going to take an example, a plant that has, this is a plant here, it is a dwarf plant, for example. It has the receptors are available, receptors of gibberellin are available, plus the hormones are not available. So we are going to treat with gibberellin. What will happen here? For sure, because receptors are available and gibberellin now, after treating it by gibberellin, it will be available, so we obtain a growth of a plant, and the plant will not be dwarf anymore. We obtain a plant that increases in length. But imagine that we have a plant with roots here, and it is a dwarf plant with no receptors of gibberellins available. If the receptors are not available and we treat this plant by gibberellins, what will happen? For sure, the plant will remain of the same size because it is not able to perform this function. And remember, whenever we talked about the receptors, and now we have two conditions for the function of a plant, for the function of a hormone, which is the availability of, one of them is the availability of receptors on the membrane of target cells. Now, we have said that gibberellins are used or are available in a plant just to make the cell division, and they affect the seed growth. What if we have a drought season, or what if we are in winter, for example, in which the conditions are not favorable for the growth of seeds or for the germination of seeds? What could happen? So there is another hormone that could be available in seeds. It is called the abscisic acid hormone. The abscisic acid, actually, it is dominant in the seed over the gibberellins. So both hormones could be available inside the seed, but abscisic acid is dominant over the gibberellins, and it makes a kind of a drought resistance by making the dormancy of the seed. Whenever the conditions are favorable against or for example, when water is available, the water will wash all the abscisic acid available, and gibberellin will remain inside it, so the plant will grow up again. The third hormone that we are going to talk about today is the ethylene hormone. What is ethylene? Ethylene, actually, it is, as we have said before, it is the only hormone gas available in plants. There is one main function of ethylene, which is to ripen fruits by breaking down the carbohydrates available in fruits into simple sugar, and by making weak cell wall by breaking down the bonds between the cellulose of the cell wall. That's why we have there is an example of ethylene. If you put, for example, an unripened banana in a plastic bag and you leave it for 2 days at room temperature, do not put it in the fridge, put it at room temperature. After 2 days, if you open the plastic bag, you will find out that the banana are ripened. This is because the banana are able to produce the gas ethylene, which helps in the formation of mature fruits. So also ethylene will be used to in the process of falling fruits from trees. There is another example of ethylene in these images. For example, you can identify, here we have unripened tomato. If we treat it with ethylene, it will become ripened. Here we have another example of unripened tomato also. Here there is an example, if we put the unripened banana in a plastic bag, it will be ripened later when it absorbs ethylene. We also have the ethylene. Actually, it is comprised of 2 types of atoms. It is comprised of 2 atoms of carbon and 4 atoms of hydrogen, and there is a double covalent bond between the carbon atoms. Now we have another example of how do we use ethylene. Whenever we ship fruits or we import and export fruits from different countries or between different countries, we actually ship it as unripened fruits, and whenever they reach the destination country, they are added in a room and they are treated by ethylene in order to make mature fruits. The last hormone that we are going to discuss today, it is the cytokinins. For sure you have heard by this word before. Cytokinins, it resembles the word cytokinesis, which is available, or which is the last step of the cell cycle. It comes after mitosis, and it means the division or the separation of the cytoplasm. So as we all know, the word cytokinins or the hormone cytokinins means more division of cytoplasm. That means we have formation of more cells. Cytokinesis, what is cytokinesis? Cytokinesis, we can too simply say it is more mitosis processes. If we have more mitosis processes, that means we have formation of more cells in a plant, and if we have formation of more cells in a plant, that means we have a plant growth. So according to this diagram, we can identify the function of cytokinins hormone. It is essential for the growth of plants, especially if it is combined with the indolacetic acid or auxin that makes a rapid growth of plants. Where can we find the cytokinins? Cytokinins, actually, it is a hormone produced by the rapidly dividing cells, and it is transported through xylem. Actually, cytokinins, it is used mostly in labs in a process called the plant tissue culture, in which we can take specific cells from a plant, we add it on a petri dish, and we add for sure all nutrients needed for the growth of a plant. Later on, if we treat it by cytokinins, these plant cells will start making division, mitotic division, and they will start increasing in size until at the end we can obtain plants which are similar to the original plants. This is the process of cloning of plants, or it is also known by the plant tissue culture. Now we are going to continue by the last part of the lesson, which is about how do hormones affect the plant responses and how do plants respond to different stimulus available. We can talk about different types of stimuli. For example, how do plants respond to a change in the amount of sunlight? How do plants respond if we put a stick, for example, beside flexible, weak plants? All of this we are going to discuss it in this part. Let's start first of all by the plant responses of let's talk about the example of nastic responses of plant. What is nastic response? A nastic response, it is the movement that doesn't depend on the direction of the stimulus. We actually have two different types of plant responses. The first type, it is called the nastic response, which is the movement that doesn't depend on the stimulus. And we have the second example, it is the tropism, which depends on the stimulus. So the plant in tropism will move toward the stimulus or away from the stimulus. Let's talk about the first type, which is the nastic response. The nastic response, akid you know an example of the Mimosa pudica plant, or we have the Venus flytrap. You know that the Venus flytrap, whenever we add a plant or whenever an insect attaches to the surface or touches the surface available, the internal part of the Venus flytrap, it starts producing a sticky material that insects will attach to it, and it will start closing on it in order to digest it. This is an example of a sensitive response. It is called the nastic response. We have another example, which is the the Mimosa pudica. Mimosa pudica, it is widely available. It is also available in streets. You can see it wherever you go. This Mimosa pudica, whenever you touch the leaves by your fingers, the leaflets will close. It is the same for the chamomile flowers. The second type of responses that we are going to talk about is the tropism. As we have said, tropism, it is the plant's growth response to a stimulus. We can identify actually two types of tropism. If a plant will grow toward the stimulus, it is called a positive tropism. For example, whenever we add a plant beside a window and sunlight could enter through this window, the plant stem will start bending towards sunlight. This is called a positive tropism. The negative tropism, it is the growth that is away from the stimulus. For example, we can take the example of stem that is growing against gravity. As you know, gravity, it is the force that pull us downward, and the negative tropism is shown by the stem because it is moving upward. We can talk about three types of tropisms in plants. We have the phototropism, and as it shows, it comes from the word photons, so it is related to sunlight. So here we can understand that sunlight is the stimulus. We have the gravitropism, and as the name shows, it is directed by the gravity, and gravity will be the stimulus here. And we have the thigmotropism. Thigmotropism, we are going to talk about it. It is a kind of a mechanical growth toward the point of contact. Let's start by the phototropism. Phototropism, as you can see here in this image, as you all know, whenever plants start bending towards sunlight, this process is called phototropism. It is a kind of a positive tropism or positive action or response of plants against the stimuli. We have here in the first image, you can see what could happen and which hormone is directly affecting the phototropism process. Oxygen molecules, actually, they move away from the place where sunlight will hit the plant. For example, here, when the sun is directly above the tip of the plant, the oxygen will be available at the tip. But whenever sunlight will start moving to the right here, if it starts moving to the right, oxygen actually will gather in the opposite face, which is facing the dark part, not the light part. Later on, what happens, because oxygen, as we have said before, it is essential for the cell elongation. Imagine that these cells available here, all of these cells are elongating because oxygen is available, and these cells actually are not. So what could happen? The stem will start bending towards sunlight because these cells are elongating at a higher rate. This is concerning the first example of tropism, called the phototropism. The second tropism available, it is called the gravitropism. As we all know, roots grow downward, so it is considered as a positive tropism, and stems are growing upward, and this is considered as a negative tropism type. What could happen if a pot filled with soil and it has a plant falls on a surface, so that the stem of the plant is now horizontal to the surface? What could happen later? The oxygen hormones will gather in the lower part of the stem according to gravity. It goes downward, and the upper part of the plant, of the stem cells, will have a low amount of oxygen. Then what could happen? The cells, or the lower cells, will start elongating at a faster rate, and then the stem will start growing upward in a negative response to gravity. This is concerning the second response, which is the second tropism response, called the gravitropism. The third response, it is called the thigmotropism, which is, I'll give you an example of it. Whenever a plant touches a support or a point of contact, it will start surrounding this point of contact, and it will start growing on it. Mostly this type of tropism is found in plants that are flexible and weak. They have a tall and weak stem, so they don't have a support. They try to find any support and they start attaching to it. For example, here you can see how do plants move toward this support available here, this stick, for example, and they start surrounding it. I hope you enjoyed our presentation and our lesson for today, and this is all concerning the plant.